Measurement of economic performance. Welcome to video 2.4, Interpreting Real GDP. Alright, aggregate output is equal to the total quantity, or is defined as the total quantity of final goods and services produced within an economy. Guess what variable we use to describe aggregate output? Those of you playing at home, yes, correct. The answer is a capital Y. Capital because it is aggregate, meaning it is for the entire economy. So, output, we talk about how much is being produced. When we say aggregate, it means for the whole economy, not a single person or firm. Total quantity for final goods and services produced within an economy. All right, now we're going to break it up a couple different ways. So, we're going to, instead of just saying GDP now, we're going to say nominal, we're going to say real, we're also going to do something per capita, so we'll get to that. Nominal GDP, your definition is going to look just like your definition for GDP, with a little bit at the end. Total value of all final goods and services produced in an economy during a given year, calculated using the prices of the current year. Alright, so this is pretty simple. Nominal GDP, you use the prices of this year. So if we're doing 2015 or the 2016 GDP, whatever year it is when you're watching this, we use that year's prices and we multiply it times the output, the total amount of final goods and services produced, and that will equal our nominal GDP. It is a very simple calculation. On the other hand, we are sometimes going to do real GDP calculations. Real GDP is the total value of all final goods and services produced in the economy during a given year, same exact definition, calculated by, and here's the difference, and it is a major difference, very important for us in this unit, calculated by adjusting prices to those of a base year. Calculated by adjusting prices to those of a base year. Now, why would this be important? Alright, so I know that's a long definition for you to write, so pause it so you can listen to me or whatever. Okay, so why do we do nominal and real? Well, let's think about it this way. Prices, are they higher or lower today than they were 20 years ago? Are they higher or lower than they were 50 years ago or 100 years ago? Well, obviously prices are getting higher and higher, correct? So if that's the case, if we want to compare how much is being produced in the United States today compared to how much we produced 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 50 years ago, if we just look at nominal GDP, obviously our nominal GDP is going to be much higher today than it was 50 years ago, right? Why? Well, because prices are higher. So we don't know if it's higher because prices are higher or because we're actually producing more final goods and services. There's no way to tell when you compare nominal GDP numbers from different years. That's why we have to adjust and use prices of a base year. So that means that we will use one certain year, and it does not matter what the base year is. It can be 1970, it can be 2000, it can be 2020, it does not matter. We need to pick a base year and then use prices of that year to multiply our output, and then we're making a good apples to apples comparison where we can say, all right, in 1970 real GDP was this, in 2000 it was this, and we have basically what we're doing is we're controlling for changes in the price level. So we control for what changes in the prices are, and we're only comparing now with real GDP, we are only comparing actual output. So that is a very important, vital thing to do when we make these comparisons. Alright, we also have a term called GDP per capita. So again, we're making comparisons that aren't really valid comparisons. If we were simply to say the United States GDP is, so much higher than Great Britain's. Well, of course it is. We have a lot more people than theirs. Does that mean our economy is actually stronger than theirs? And the answer is we don't know. It might mean that, but it might not. The way to find out is to do GDP per capita, which is GDP divided by the population. And so what that tells us is the average GDP per person. And then we can compare living standards among different countries. And so this map has done it for you. And if you like maps as much as I do, you probably don't. But it's kind of interesting. You can see parts of the world that are doing much, much better, and it probably goes with what you would expect. Parts of the country that are doing much worse, or of the world, I'm sorry. But anyway, so you have that GDP per capita. Weaknesses of real GDP. All right, so why isn't even real GDP isn't a perfect calculation, perfect measure? Well, it doesn't include some things that add to happiness. So the fact that we have more leisure time today than we used to have. The fact that we have air conditioning today and we didn't in the past, and so our lives are simply more comfortable. Or the fact that technology has improved our lives and again made it so much more comfortable. These things aren't included in real GDP. So it's really hard to measure the kind of intangible benefits, things that make us happy. On the other hand, it includes some things that make us unhappy. For instance, divorce adds to GDP. Because when a person or a couple gets divorced, they need to pay for lawyers. That's a service. They need to pay court fees and other things like that. So more people getting divorced actually adds to our GDP. That doesn't actually mean we're better off. War adds to a country's GDP. Our GDP exploded in World War II. Does that mean that we were happier? Well, no. We had a lot of people that were killed and injured and maimed and things like that. We had destruction, not so much in this country, but European countries, same thing. Their GDP increased because they were spending so much money on war, and then they had to spend money on rebuilding their countries after they were destroyed. So their GDP looks good, but really, were they any better off after than they were before? And the answer is no. So again, GDP is not a perfect measure. All right, this has been a LaMoney Production. My boy Zach. ZT.